Hello and welcome to our webinar on the war in the Middle East with repercussions across the region and the world. I'm Hasan Ünal of Başkent University in Ankara. I'm also the director of a recently set up think tank, New World Research Center. And I'm going to moderate this panel. I've got three distinguished scholars who would be talking about various aspects of the war with implications for the regional states as well as for international actors. Let me briefly introduce them. I've got Dr. Abdullah Baabood, who is a member of the Waseda University in Japan, of the Qatari chair of Islamic Studies, and he's from originally Oman, and he's joined from Oman today. He's going to be talking about the war, particularly within the regional context. And I've also got Mr. Rahr from Germany, who is joined from Germany, and he's going to be talking about the war within the European context and with a view to particularly focusing on the energy problems, but he's also going to be commenting on the geopolitical sides of the whole ugly war that has been actually going on. Meanwhile, I've got an American colleague who is also going to join us. He's the deputy director of the Middle East Studies at Quincy Institute in the United States, Adam Weinstein, and he's going to be joining us in about 10-15 minutes. So then the viewers, each panelist is going to be taking about 15 minutes roughly to finish their presentation, and then the session will be open to questions and answers, and then we are gonna bring it to an end. Well, with such an illegal war that is been raging across the Middle East between Iran on the one hand, which has come under attack by the United States and Israel, and the United States and Israel, basically, we are going to be looking at it from various aspects, mostly geopolitical aspects. We are also we will, whenever appropriate, we will also touch upon the legal sides of the matter. Let me now invite Dr. Abdullah Baabood to do his presentation. Dr. Abdullah Baabood, the floor is yours. Please.
Thank you, Professor Hasan. Thank you, Harici, for the kind invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you and also to be in this distinguished panel with distinguished colleagues. I am currently, as you correctly introduced me, I'm currently in Oman, and I'm speaking from Oman. As you know, Oman is one of the neighboring countries of Iran and part of the Gulf Cooperation Council states. For us, we see things differently here, of course, because we are the closest to Iran, and we have been implicated in the Gulf states in this war, and it's not a war that, of our will, as it were. The war has been decided illegally against a neighboring country. There are no strong excuses to enter into war, and this is not just any war. This is, the most powerful country in the world is conducting it with also another country, a powerful country in the Middle East. Both are nuclear powers. And they're conducting it against a neighboring state under the false premises of nuclear arms or regime change or regional policy or missile technology. And even the objectives of the wars are difficult to ascertain. Even the people who created and entered into the war, they're not clear about their war objectives and the reasons for their war. Having said that, this is also a continuation of a war that had started last year, what is known as the 12 Days War, when both the United States and Iran attacked, United States and Israel attacked Iran. But the war ended in 12 days then. And the war started while there was actually serious negotiations taking place with the Omani government being involved then. And actually it happened once again. During this current crisis, the current war, the Omanis were involved in negotiating an agreement between the United States and Iran on those issues that the United States were worried about, which is, and maybe some of the world community, which is the nuclear arms and the missiles and the regional policy. From what we understand from the Omani foreign minister is that Iran had actually agreed to almost everything that the United States demanded. And they were very close, and he was very hopeful just a day before the attack took place. And he said that, that this agreement goes far, way beyond the agreement in 2015, the nuclear deal. And Iran is accepting the U.S. demands in terms of, enrichment, in terms of stockpiling of the nuclear facility, nuclear, the weapons, etc. And they were also happy to discuss their missile technology. They were happy to discuss their regional policies, but they wanted to have some kind of undertaking from the United States that Iran will be allowed to the international community, that they will be able to trade and work with their neighbors, and they will be able to, their sanctions against their economy would be lifted. So we were all very hopeful that this is going to avert a devastating war for the region. And you all know what is going on. Now we are, I think, on the 8th or 9th day of the war.
I think 9th.
9th day since it started. This is a very devastating war. War goes beyond the normal, conduct of war, where not only military sites are being attacked, but also we are seeing the leadership has been attacked and killed. We've seen schools have been attacked. We've seen civilian infrastructures have been attacked. And in Iran, but also Iran is also attacking the United States and Israel, United States bases, but also Israel and also the Gulf states, because they assume that that the Gulf states have allowed bases for Americans. So we have become a victim of this war, not a war of our choice, and we are suffering because of this. When the Gulf states are actually trying very hard to make rapprochement with each other, to have peace and stability in the region, to diversify their economy and work towards fulfilling their visions, economic visions, etc. We find ourselves in the middle of a war that is not being decided by us, and we have now taken it, and we can't even decide how it is going to happen. And if anything, the war has been decided between Tel Aviv and Washington. And and we are paying the price for it. And the whole community, world community, is also paying the price, because this region is very important for global energy and for global connectivity. We've seen that, Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz, or attempts to close it. We've seen that there has been attacks on oil installations, and there's been some of the countries in the region have started to stop their exports because they can't guarantee safety and security of the shipping or of their facilities. This is going to have a huge impact on the world economy and the world energy needs. We don't know where this war is going to go. We don't know what are the aims, which as I said earlier, they keep changing. And we now have a new leadership, a new Ayatollah in Iran, and Iran seems to be weathering all the attacks and outliving at least, and absorbing all the attacks, and still fighting back. This could take, according to some calculations, between 5 to 6 weeks, or even longer. And we question the rationale for this war. We question the intention and the real intention. And we think that whoever wanted to start this war doesn't really care about lives, about our interest in the region, and doesn't care about the international economy. And it seems that Tel Aviv, Israel, is fulfilling its dreams of becoming the major Middle Eastern country, the larger Israel, and now also attacking the neighboring countries. We've seen this happening in Lebanon concurrently with the war in Iran. So this, of course, doesn't bode well, and it's only going to ignite more conflicts and ignite more radicalization in the region and instability. And the timing is wrong. The intentions are wrong. The strategy is wrong. And it's actually quite perplexing to understand what do these people want, and what do they want from our region, when we are trying to cooperate. We're trying to work with the United States, and even suggested to Israel that if Israel was to accept a two-state solution, accept the Palestinian state, we're happy. The whole region, the whole Arab and Middle and Muslim world was happy to enter into a normal relationship with Israel. But Israel doesn't seem to want to do that. They want to have their own cake and eat it. They don't want to give the Palestinians their homeland, or they don't want to give a two-state solution, and they don't want to give one-state solution. And they have no solution. The only solution they have is to fulfill this, trying to fulfill this biblical dream of creating a greater Israel. And this is only going to inflict more conflicts and more wars and more instability in the region. And I don't think this war against Iran is going to bode well. As I said, the implications are, of course, the cost of it is very high to the United States, of course, to us, to Iran as well, and to Israel. And we keep asking ourselves, what is going on? What happened to the brains and the minds of the good people and the friends that we have in the United States and around the world? And we haven't heard, very few voices that are asked to stop the war, not only within the United States, but even in Europe and even, globally, because, no one wants to upset President Trump, and his leadership. But this is not something that's going to help the United States in the future in its relationship with the region. And in fact, if anything, it's going to push the region here in the Middle East more towards Asia, as it is being pushed economically towards Asia because of the rise of oil demands there and so on. But there is a lot of mistrust that is being building here, and especially if you take this on the back of what just happened in the war in Gaza, and the fact that there was a genocide and ethnic cleansing and war against humanity that took place in Gaza, and was supported by the U.S. And now we see that the same preparator, Israel, is now also attacking a neighboring country and also supported with the U.S. I think there is going to be a big lack of confidence and trust in the strategic partner to the Gulf states and to the Middle Eastern country, which is the United States. So I think we are at a very serious inflection point where things are changing. Of course, we are seeing that an eclipse of global hegemon, which is the United States, and the rise of another hegemonic power or global power, which is China. And these kinds of times can be very perplexing and can be very unstable. But when people expected that to a certain extent, but this goes beyond all of this. It's actually it's very difficult to describe it, but it is madness, and we are, as I said, paying a very high cost for this madness. If you like, I will stop there and happy to come up.
Well, thank you very much, not only for the very good presentation, informative and analytical, but at the same time, you have obeyed the time limit, just as it is. So thank you very much. Meanwhile, ladies and gentlemen, we've got Adam Weinstein, who is the Deputy Director of the Middle East Program at the Quincy Institute in the United States. He's joined us. Adam, hello, and welcome to the panel.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, you can be heard here, and I'm sure all the others can hear you quite well. Now, let me give you the floor, for about 15 minutes. We expect you to talk about particularly the United States policy in the Middle East and focusing on the war raging across the region. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you for having me. I don't know if I'll use the full 15 minutes, but this war didn't happen in a vacuum. It's been a long time coming. The other panelists have been following this for years, maybe longer than I have. But as you know, there was a golden opportunity at some point between the Obama administration and Iran when they negotiated the JCPOA, or what people refer to as the nuclear deal. And the JCPOA offered an opportunity to take the most contentious issue, the nuclear issue, off the table for a period of time, and offer sanctions relief to Iran. Unfortunately, the Trump administration ripped up that agreement and didn't make much effort to replace it until the second Trump administration. But it's also important to remember that even though the Obama administration had negotiated that agreement themselves, they were also putting a lot of stress on it. They removed some sanctions and then created new sanctions, which in a sense violated the spirit of the agreement. I think the approach of the Obama administration to the JCPOA was to treat it as if it was some type of corporate contract in which you could find loopholes and try to stretch the agreement. But it was a political agreement at the end of the day, even though it was highly technical. and it was already beginning to falter even before the first Trump administration. But of course, the first Trump administration is the one that destroyed that agreement, and then of course assassinated Qasem Soleimani. And although many people in the DC Beltway policy space will say that this war that's being executed right now is grossly mismanaged and doesn't have a clear end state and doesn't have a clear strategy, there was a lot of applause, along the way during, for steps that took us closer to this conflict. And if you were in Washington over the last 10 years or so, from the time that the JCPOA was negotiated to what we see today, where we're in full-scale war with Iran, and you warned that some of these steps, whether it was maximum pressure sanctions, whether it was killing Qasem Soleimani, whether it was the tit for tat attacks that would occur in Iraq between Iran-aligned militias in the US. If you were in the minority of voices that warned that this was creating the conditions for a potential war, you were sort of cast aside as being, you know, being prone to hyperbole and being alarmist, and it was never going to come to this. In fact, just a few weeks ago, the general mood in DC was, okay, the Trump administration might engage in some limited strikes as a negotiating tactic, as a coercive negotiating tactic, but they wouldn't actually embark on the kind of war that we're seeing today. And anyone who said otherwise was kind of deemed an alarmist. I mean, that's just a fact. Now, over the next couple of years, or the next couple of months rather, we're going to see everybody say, well, we always warned that this was going to happen and this was deeply misguided. Um, that's a feature of how the policy space in Washington works. You saw the same kind of rhetoric when the US withdrew from Afghanistan. Suddenly everybody had been against the war and knew that it was a fool's errand and actually supported the withdrawal. So people tend to go where they think the current is going in terms of their analysis. But this war was a long time coming. Now, it doesn't mean that the Iranians aren't to blame as well. I think over the last several months, Khamenei really didn't accept the position that he was in. And they really felt that they had more time and more leverage with the Trump administration than they did. They were looking at when you saw the kinds of negotiations that were happening between Harici and Trump's envoys, it was, both sides were taking these maximalist positions. The Trump administration was basically giving a list of demands that they expected the Iranians to capitulate to, and the Iranians were engaging in their typical style of hard bargaining and focusing on some technical details. The problem, I think, is that the Iranians they didn't fully realize they were dealing with a whole new type of administration. The kind of administration where if you taunt them over Twitter, as the late Supreme Leader did, that's enough to push them over the edge. Um, I think they also miscalculated the fact that the Trump administration, Mr. Trump himself, has this fantasy about remaking the Middle East, and he really believes that he can be the one to really change course in the Middle East, and he has certain evidence to back up that claim. Although he's viewing it in a vacuum. I mean, he really does believe when he says that he installed Ahmed al-Shara in Damascus, he really does believe that, even though, it's much more complicated than that. He
Yeah.
really does believe that he can dismantle Hezbollah and that he can dismantle the Iranian regime and that he's somehow brought peace to Gaza and that he can be this unifier of Middle East states and he can end this conflict. He really does have that amount of hubris. And then, of course, the Israelis realize that, and I think people give the Israelis a little too much credit. They claim that the Israelis have manipulated Trump or have pushed Trump into embarking on this regime change war. It's not that difficult to manipulate President Trump. I think they've done
Mm.
it masterfully, but it's not that difficult of a task. And so I think that's how we got to where we are today in terms of what we're seeing going on in Iran. Now, is the Trump administration playing 3D chess as its supporters like to claim it is? I doubt that. Um, I think, leading up to these strikes in Iran, within conservative circles, there was a belief that the Trump administration had finally gotten a blueprint to regime change right. And what the example that was cited was Venezuela and his
Mm.
successful kidnapping of Maduro and getting the remainder of the Chavistas to sort of fall in line with American interests. And, the problem is that Iran is not Venezuela. Venezuela doesn't have a strong retaliatory capacity the way Iran
Yeah.
does. The Iranian regime is much more sophisticated than the Venezuelan Chavistas are. The Iranian regime has been preparing for this moment and the decapitation of the supreme leader for decades. And unlike the Syria example, there's not an opposition figure that is organized enough to unite a critical mass of Iranians to act as a replacement for the regime. I mean, this is another dysfunction of US policymaking, which is that we have very loud diasporas that will tell US policymakers with great confidence what's going to happen if they engage in regime change. Those diasporas, I feel for them. I feel for the Iranian diaspora. I have many friends in the Iranian diaspora. I congratulate them on the removal of Ali Khamenei. I know that most Iranians were happy to see that, even if they disagreed with that war. Most Iranians in the diaspora, not necessarily most Iranians in Iran. But the diaspora is not necessarily representative of the demography inside Iran. As soon as you become a diaspora, you're living a vastly different existence than those who remain in the country. And you can see that again and again. I mean, you see even within Iraq, you saw a difference between the Shia political leaders who had lived through the Saddam era and the ones who had existed in exile in Iran. Um, so, you know, diasporas don't necessarily give the best advice. I mean, they gave terrible advice on Iraq. They gave really incorrect advice on Afghanistan, and I think the Iranian diaspora is not giving, necessarily accurate advice when it comes to Iran. And if you want to see how divided Iranian society is, look at the diaspora. I mean, nobody can agree on what comes next. There's not an organized leader that can challenge the regime. And there was this belief in Washington, I think, that if they engaged in these kinds of strikes, there would be this mass mobilization in the streets of ordinary Iranians to overthrow the regime, but that just hasn't happened. And one of the reasons that hasn't happened is because there's not a unifying leader. And another reason is that the regime is incredibly repressive. And as soon as these strikes started happening, you saw that the Basijis were out in the streets making sure that people didn't rise up. And the regime has a lot of coercive, repressive power that is built into the society, and there's many layers to the regime. So simply removing the supreme leader doesn't change the fact that the regime can, especially the group, the Basij and the IRGC can really mobilize and remain organized. So I think that's why we haven't seen this mass uprising that perhaps the diaspora told us we were going to see. Um, so that's another dysfunction of the US policymaking process. So now we have this kind of mess. I mean, President Trump, who said he wasn't going to engage in regime change wars and nation building, is involved in regime change wars and nation building. And when you gratuitously bomb the capital of a large country like Iran, and you bomb its government facilities, whether you like it or not, now you're in the business of nation building. Um,
Yep.
you can't just walk away, especially when you have U.S. bases and troops in the region, and the effects of destabilizing Iran are going to be felt within Iran's neighbors for years and years and years to come. We've created another generational crisis. And maybe in 10 years I'll be proved wrong. Maybe in 10 years Iran will be a democracy. I mean, if there's anything we should have learned in the last 3 years, it's that many predictions that people like us on panels like these make turn out to be wrong. But but the historical record shows that what we're probably going to get is a 10 to 20 year problem. And this is not an administration that has patience, the kind of foreign policy patience and expertise that they're going to be able to deal with this problem in a positive way. And I agree with the last speaker, which is that they've thrown the partners in our region are afraid to criticize this because they don't want to deal with the wrath of the Trump administration. But it doesn't mean that behind closed doors they're not having extremely worried conversations. They are. And that's the problem. And now we have a new supreme leader who is as ideological as his father, but now he has the added chip on his shoulder that his father, mother, wife, and one of his children were killed by the United States. So I don't think this is going to necessarily be a pragmatic figure. And worse yet, the people who are calling the shots day to day are the IRGC. So this is really, as what is it? Jump, I forget the saying, jumping from the pan into the fireplace or the frying pan into the fireplace. I mean, we've just made things a lot worse for ourselves. And it really, the Trump administration blew a golden opportunity, and I'll close with this, which is that it was an administration that, because it was in its second term, because it had a Republican Party that refused to criticize anything it does, and that was in control. President Trump was so iconoclastic that he's the kind of president that could have negotiated a comprehensive deal with the Iranians and even opened a U.S. embassy in Tehran without much political blowback. He could have taken risks that past traditional administrations would have been terrified to take, that could have set a course for a more stable Middle East. And instead, he chose to repeat the mistakes of his predecessors, mistakes that he spent his entire very short political career, but his entire political career criticizing. It's unfortunate. And I'm not going to make predictions about what comes next because I don't think anyone knows. And that's a serious problem.
Well, thank you very much. I'll come back to all of you with quite a few questions and comments when all the participants finish. Now, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Rahr. Mr. Rahr, pardon me. I'm so sorry about it. This is my allergy season in Ankara, and it comes up occasionally. And Mr. Rahr, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. I start with some common wisdom. The Middle East has been regarded as a permanent hotspot of global politics since the end of the Second World War, because all major powers pursue strategic interest in this region. And because of that, any military conflict there carries the potential to escalate into a global war. Today, this danger appears more real than ever. Just as in the war in Ukraine, a direct military confrontation between nuclear powers cannot be ruled out. And politicians on both sides occasionally speak about the possibility of using nuclear weapons. The conflict with Iran also carries the risk of a broader confrontation between nuclear powers. The involvement of the United States and the involvement of Israel in a direct or indirect confrontation with China or Russia is at least conceivable. It is already becoming clear, from my point of view, that a war with Iran could become a prolonged conflict. This has been also said by the speakers before, unless Washington and Tel Aviv abandon their declared objective of overthrowing the Iranian regime and instead limit themselves to destroying Iran's military and industrial capabilities. Russia is currently heavily constrained in its ability to support Iran due to its costly and prolonged war in Ukraine. However, China, the world's second most powerful military power, is unlikely to watch developments in Iran passively. One unspoken strategic objective of the United States, not yet mentioned in our discussion, but I think it is true, appears to be pushing China out of the Middle East and limiting its influence over the oil and resource trade in the Persian Gulf. Russia has already lost Syria as a strategic ally following the fall of Assad. In the near future, China will commemorate the 100th anniversary of its founding of its People's Army, it is reasonable to assume that Beijing views reunification with Taiwan or the conquering of Taiwan as a symbolic achievement it would like to realize by that milestone. The recent serious violation of international law represented by the American attack on the sovereign state of Iran may influence China's strategic calculations regarding Taiwan. For the moment, Chinese strategists are closely observing the military situation in the Persian Gulf, particularly the strengths and weakness of American air defense systems. If the Iran war continues for a prolonged period, it could potentially draw China, Russia, and several Arab states into a broader confrontation, just as Ukraine could only realistically defeat Russia if NATO were drawn directly into the war. Iran's strategy may aim to mobilize the wider Arab world against Israel. A similar attempt was made by Iraq after it was first attacked by the United States in the 90s. Three aspects of the Iran conflict deserve, from my point of view, particular attention: the striking impotence of the European Union, the political passivity of the BRICS states, and the emerging energy shock for Europe. The European Union fears that a Russian victory over Ukraine would fundamentally undermine the European security architecture, which has been established so successfully in the European point of view after the end of the Cold War. Russia would once again reappear as a major military power in Eastern Europe, albeit as an adversary. At the same time, the EU plays only a marginal role in negotiations about ending the war in Ukraine. The United States and Russia appear prepared to negotiate the future of Ukraine largely over the heads of the Europeans. Europe has largely halted trade with Russia, thereby losing access to important Siberian raw materials, which are now increasingly flowing to China. This strategic self-inflicted damage is now being followed by another crisis. The war with Iran threatens energy supplies from the Persian Gulf, driving oil and gasoline prices sharply upward and accelerating Europe's ongoing deindustrialization. Meanwhile, the American energy and arms industries are experiencing an unprecedented boom, partly because Europe currently has almost no alternatives to American supplies. In the long run, Europe's growing shortage of raw materials could seriously weaken the economic stability of the European Union. Under these circumstances, a strategic decoupling of Europe from the United States appears completely unrealistic, in my view. Europe's dependence on the United States is therefore likely to persist for many years, regardless of the political rhetorics of European leaders today. The future of the BRICS alliance may also be decided in the near future. The cohesion of this bloc, which presents itself as an alternative to the Western-dominated global order, appears increasingly fragile. The European Union is currently attempting to draw countries such as India and Brazil closer to the West through economic cooperation, thereby weakening their ties with Russia and China. At the same time, Western countries are seeking to pull former Soviet republics in the South Caucasus and Central Asia permanently out of Russia's sphere of influence. It was primarily Russia that promoted BRICS as an instrument for building a multipolar world order in opposition to the West's previously dominant unipolar system. Yet, within this organization, China has long become the strongest power. Ultimately, the future direction of BRICS will largely be determined by China. Russia has become deeply entangled in the war in Ukraine and could lose yet another strategic ally after Syria if Iran were to be weakened or defeated. My personal outlook is that the world may evolve into a tripolar order. Europe's fate will remain closely tied to the United States, and an independent geopolitical role for the European Union appears unlikely in the foreseeable future. China will race as a dominant partner in its relationship with Russia. Russia, meanwhile, having entered into a long-term confrontation with the West, will likely see no strategic alternative, at least as long as Vladimir Putin remains in power, other than close military-economic partnership with China. The most dramatic political developments, however, may occur in the Middle East and North Africa. In the aftermath of the current chaos, a coalition of Islamist forces could attempt to establish a new political order in the region. A long-term American-Israeli security architecture in the Middle East, primarily based on deterring Russia and China and maybe even other countries, would effectively mark a return to a new Cold War era, an arrangement that may prove, from my point of view, impossible to sustain in the long run. So far, my thoughts. Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much indeed for this brilliant presentation. Now, let's move to the short Q&A session. Let me use my position as the moderator to raise a few questions, and you can shortly respond to each of them. Well, the first question I'd like to raise is whether or not there's going to be a realignment, particularly among the Arab states of the Gulf, in their relations with the United States. It seems there has been some outcry among the Gulf Arab states saying that they have been basically left to their own devices as the United States basically concentrated on defending Israel and leaving them out hard and dry. So would it actually lead to some sort of realignment in the Gulf Arab world and also in the Middle Eastern Arab world? Now we have Saudi Arabia and Pakistan as military allies. Whether this would actually get enlarged into something different to contain or to restrain Israel. And the other question I'd like to basically put forward is, how do you see the upshot of this war? I mean, it is difficult to foresee that Iran really crumbling. But at the same time, it is equally difficult to foresee Iran defeating both United States and Israel. Well, of course, what is defeat, what is a win in this war needs to be clarified in every respect. And the other question is, how could the European countries get together with the United States in this illegal, totally illegal war by Israel and the United States on Iran? Given that recently the Trump administration was basically talking about the forcible acquisition of Greenland from Denmark and all that. How could they basically just get in line when the United States go out for such a very risky adventure in the Middle East in every respect? Please, yeah. How would you respond to that? But let's follow the same line again, with Dr. Abdullah Baabood responding to any of the question. You can either respond to three of it or you choose one and respond to, please.
Thank you, Professor Hasan. Let me try and respond to the first one as relates to the Gulf states. And as previous speakers have mentioned, the Middle East is not without its crisis. It's always been there. And as you know, the Middle East has been occupied in the past by European powers. And when Europe withdrew, or European powers withdrew, especially the British, and they entrusted the security of the Gulf to the Americans. But since we had that, you can look at how many crises have happened since Pax Americana took over from Pax Britannica. The revolution in Iran, the Iran-Iraq war, the invasion of Kuwait, the invasion of Iraq, and so on. And it goes on, and we are witnessing one now as we are speaking. Yes, we do have our fault lines, and we have our own problems, but I don't think we are also helped by so much by international intervention. And now we see that international intervention is taking a different mode altogether, where in the past, the United States relied on what is known as the twin pillar policy to guarantee security in the Gulf. And that was Iran during the Shah's time, and also Saudi Arabia. But now, with the pivot of the United States, however one wants to explain that, towards Asia, and it's leaving the Middle East, as it were. Obviously, it wants to have another power. And what is the most plausible power for the United States to have? Of course, Iran is gone. It's no longer an ally of the United States. It's an enemy now, as we can see. Saudi Arabia is also not sure about how far they want to go with the United States. So the country they are going to be working on and trying to empower to, guarantee security from their perspective is this greater Israel that they are trying to now push down our throats. And who's the other partner? I don't know. But obviously, the United States had its own strategy for the region. It's not necessarily going to work. It's just going to add to more crises in the region. And if you add to that what Europe has also been doing, Europe has been basically neglected the Middle East. It gave it a benign neglect, where there is so much relationship could have been built, beneficial relationship between the Middle East and Europe. And there is so much interdependence between the Middle East and Europe. Europe chose not to get too much engaged in the Middle East. So the Euro-Arab dialogue failed, the Euro-Gulf dialogue failed, the Euro-Mediterranean dialogue failed. Anything they wanted to do has basically failed in the region. And we can't talk about a particular European project that has been successful in this region. And yet when you see Europe is the most affected region by the development and the chaos in the Middle East, but it's not even trying to do its own job. It's having its own internal problems, and it's looking more, internally. I think also, there has been changes in the global, the global economy and the geopolitics and geoeconomics, where we have seen the center of economic gravity is actually shifting eastward. And it used to be in the Atlantic. It's now closer to China, because of the rise of activities in Asian countries, China in particular, but also Japan, South Korea, and other ASEAN countries. And the Gulf states' future is more now, economic future is more dependent on Asia than it is actually with Europe or the United States. Because the United States hardly imports any oil and gas from the region, because it has self-sufficiency to a large extent. And Europe has shifted its strategy more towards China, towards Russia, but that's also now changing, obviously because of the war in Ukraine. So most of the Gulf states' future economic development actually depends on China. And there is a pivot from the Gulf states, from the Middle East to China. And what the United States policies is now doing is actually increasing this pivot and increasing the mistrust that the people in this region have. It's not that these people in the region are against Europe or against the United States. In fact, it's to the opposite. We all, most of us studied in European and university and American universities. We have good relationship with Europeans and Americans, but their policies in the region is actually, so perplexing for us that they are pushing us more towards Asia, towards China, and so on. And with this economic need, as it were, that is now becoming a reality. And it's a real shame that, given all of that has been invested from Europe and also the United States in this region, we are seeing it crumble in front of our eyes, and someone else is coming to reap the benefit because of some bad people making bad policies in some of these countries. Let me stop there if you like.
Well, thank you very much. Adam, are you with us? Yes.
Yes, I'm with you.
Well, yeah, basically respond to whichever question you choose.
Well, I was actually in Davos, although I didn't see the speech when Prime Minister Carney made his speech about the end of the so-called, the end of the current political order, the rules-based international order, and I remember he received so much applause to that. Although I don't know that it's the end of U.S. hegemony. I mean, and I say this to say that, been a lot of talk that the Europeans and Canadians and other countries are fed up with the United States, and I think they are, but yet, as you said in your question, they're still willing to fall in line behind the Trump administration, at least when it comes to the Middle East. And I think we've seen a lack of courage among the European Union and other European countries that they've made themselves less relevant. They've made themselves less relevant for a long time. And I have some empathy for the tough position that they're in, and the way that the United States does not consider our friends at all much of the time when we engage in actions abroad. But at the same time, I think there's been a lack of courage in Europe, and as a result, they've made themselves less relevant. Although I'm curious what our German colleague has to say about that, and he probably has a deeper understanding than I do. You know, this war isn't advantageous for anyone. I mean, it's not advantageous for China. China is losing tons of money right now and is at risk of losing tons of money. Perhaps, I'm not a China expert, so perhaps Xi Jinping and his inner circle view this yet another, another misstep by the United States as perhaps positive for their very, very, very long-term aims. But in the short term, China is losing a lot of money, and the risk of its business interests in the region have gone way up. China's the biggest investor in Iraq, even though it was the United States that spent so many years there militarily. China has followed, China follows behind American tanks with construction companies, and it rebuilds and it engages in a lot of investment. But this kind of instability that the actions of the Trump administration in Israel have created is not good for anyone. I don't know if I even remember the second part of your question. I think it had. Can you remind me?
Well, I think you've covered much of it actually, but perhaps a little one more question. Would you like to comment on the impact of the Israeli lobby on decision making in the United States? Because this is not advantageous for the United States, it's not advantageous for Europe, nor is it advantageous for anyone in the short term, either for China, anybody. certainly not Russia. Everybody wants this war to stop, but then you have this war. Why did it basically happen in the first place? Um, uh, where would you place the Israeli lobby in the decision making?
I mean, the Israeli lobby was a factor for sure. It is a powerful lobby in the United States. That shouldn't be a controversial statement to say. And it is a powerful lobby for Trump himself because of the Adelson's involvement in it and their close relationship with President Trump. So there's no doubt that the, you know, the Israel lobby and individual, uh, conservative, members of that lobby who are American citizens who have close relationships with Trump, have an influence on his decision making. Uh, I don't know how to weigh that. I mean, I know some people think that was exclusively why this is happening. I still stand by the fact that I think President Trump genuinely believes he can remake the Middle East, and that satisfies his ego. Um, and I also stand by the fact that, I mean, with a normal administration, this shouldn't matter. But in the weeks leading up to the strike, I mean, the Supreme Leader, the late Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was tweeting out, AI images of U.S. ships being sunk to the bottom of the sea, and threatening to use Chinese weapons against U.S. ships, and basically calling President Trump arrogant and saying that many before him have tried to remove the Iranian regime and it didn't work then and it won't work now. With a normal administration, that would be seen as domestic rhetoric and would be ignored. But with somebody like President Trump, who quite literally spends a lot of time on Twitter, I mean, that has the power to shift his decision from maybe giving negotiations a little more time to invading the country. I mean, I know that this analysis is going to sound laughable, but it's true. That is how the Trump administration works. They do not have an interagency process. They do not have a policy making process. It is not a traditional administration. They decide they're going to do things on a whim, and then everyone else has to play catch up, whether that's US Central Command or any of the other government agencies. And there's a small inner circle that matters in that administration. Nobody else does. I do agree that the Israeli lobby has a seat in that decision-making process. I think they were a factor. I think they helped push it over the finish line. But I think some of this is just President Trump himself.
Well, that's where the second part of my question was actually. It is. Um, would you like to comment on how the war would basically end for the United States and or Iran, if you would like to comment?
Um, if I had to make an educated guess, I would say that it ends in some sort of either stalemate or kind of negotiated settlement with a updated Iranian regime that is not any better on human rights or democracy, but might be willing to make a few concessions to the Trump administration to stop the war. But I just don't know. I mean, that's like almost a hopeful end because the alternatives are worse. Do I think Iran is going to, have a popular uprising and that in 5 years it's going to be because its people are some of the most educated in the Middle East, it's going to be a thriving democracy with a economy that everyone wants to get a piece of because it's exploding with success? No, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think the conditions for that are in place. But I don't know. This is the problem. But see, this is the problem. I mean, anyone who says they know what's going to happen in the next few years, including people in the U.S. government, are lying. Uh, and this is the U.S. approach to the Middle East to create seismic change, and complete instability, and have no idea how it's going to end. And this is the U.S. approach to the Middle East for the last 25 years. And we're back at it again.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And Mr. Rahr, please do comment on the European countries falling behind the American administration when it comes to international
Right.
interventions of this sort, and then how would they think that they could continue to lecture democracy, human rights, freedoms, and blah blah, while at the same time following Trump administration's wars and also supporting Israel's genocidal war in Gaza?
I will respond to this question with pleasure.
Please.
If I may, I like what Adam said before in his talk that political scientists and politicians tend to throw their weight behind one theory, and when it goes the other way around, they change their mind to 180 degrees immediately and say that they always knew that this was this and not that. I think this happens all the time. But certain things, in my mind, remain and should be seen as truths, new truths, from my point of view, which will not change at all. And one of very important aspects of our time is the creation of the multipolar world. This is not only a phrase, I think it's real, because the unipolar world, if you allow me to use this terminology, is gone because the order which has been created in the world after the Cold War has been damaged, severely damaged, and I think it's gone. It's really gone, and a new thing has to be created. We probably a new Yalta or 45 or something like that. And in this connection, of course, I'm very interested in hearing also Abdullah's and other opinions of the possibility of the Arab states to unite, because I think that the vacuum which will be created after the war, I don't believe that the Arab states and the parties of the region will accept a great Israel. I don't think so. I may be wrong, but this is not historically. I mean, Israel will, of course, it will survive. It will be there. It is, but great Israel, I have my doubts about this. But the vacuum will be there. American will return to back after the war. The Chinese are economically in the region. Politically, the Russians are out for the moment. I think the vacuum will be filled by something which I don't yet understand by whom, but it will be filled. But a lot depends on who will be in power in Iran and in Saudi Arabia and these key countries. So I'm not a specialist on this region, but I think this is the most intriguing question, and that will be another cornerstone for the creation of the multipolar world. Now about Europe, I think that the Europeans, they, as I said in my introduction, are simply too weak and disunited to create a common or an autonomous pole in the multipolar world for Europe. We don't have the economic might to do it like the United States, China, and other countries. I detect a split of Europe in the northern part and the southern part. The northern part want to militarize Europe to fight against Russia. That's the Scandinavian states, that is Germany, partly France, but only partly, Great Britain, Poland, the Baltic states, that's all. The South is quiet. The southern countries want even a normalization of the relationship with Russia. And basically, I detect also that these countries are more sympathetic to the Arab point of view, less to the Israeli point of view. Look at Spain and look at also Italy and to the Greece and the States. But the northern part of Europe, this will be the Kern Europa, the core Europe, which will try to decide some kind of questions of military and security for the architecture. But it's not enough to make Europe strong. We will, in Europe, remain some kind of vassals of the United States. I don't like this word, but I can't find another one, simply because history has determined this in the past 80 years. The Europeans deliberately gave away their parts of their sovereignty, their economic strength, the military strength to the United States. And the elites live with that, and they want to continue this. The only strategy which I detect today in Europe is to wait until Trump maybe will be ousted by the Democrats, another president will be in power, and then a new Biden or a new Kamala Harris will come to power, and then everything will be like a status quo, normal, a new Obama. This will make Europeans happy, and this is what they all hope for. They are basically also naive to believe that this will probably also come true. But this is not a strategy. And again, I repeat, there is unfortunately no other strategy as to hope that the United States will get normal again. The Europeans are completely disinterested, in my point of view, of trying to solve the problems of the Middle East. They have no leverage into these countries. They have business with these countries, but it's not enough to have really lobbies or have strength to influence decisions in these regions. They are not military from a security point of view. They are not there. And this is an important point, they are completely focused, especially the northern parts of Europe, focused on the war with Russia. And they support the United States in the war against Iran, mainly out of the understanding that if they support Trump, if they don't criticize him, Trump will support them in the fight against Russia in Ukraine. Because Ukraine, from the point of the Europeans, should never lose. Because that will, as I said in my speech before, will change the security architecture of Europe dramatically, not into the favor of Germany, France, and Great Britain. I think this is the issue, maybe not an optimistic picture, but I think we lived to this. Many questions remain open, and my colleagues are completely right. We don't know the future. We can't only guess. But let's hope that at the next conference, which you organize in half a year, we will see a little bit more light at the end of the horizon.
Well, thank you very much. It seems as if the guesswork is going to go on for quite some time to come. And we would be all following the developments in the Middle East and across the globe. How, for instance, multipolarity gets established, and then whether the transition from unipolarity to multipolarity is going to be extremely uneasy, if not difficult, and how the United States and its friends and allies are going to oppose it, and in what way. So there's going to be quite a bit for all of us to follow from various perspectives. Well, with all these, I would like to conclude our panel today, unless you have something to add. And if you don't, then I can conclude it. And thank you very much for your participation. And as you all said, we should be organizing new panels. Thank you very much. Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Nice to meet you all. Thank you.
Yeah, very nice to meet you too. Yes, bye-bye for now.